In this video, I'm going to talk about one of my favorite cartoons of all time, Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes, and talk about why it might be one of the best things to watch for comic book spec. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another video with Swaggle Haas. And in this video, I'm going to talk about one of my favorite cartoons of all time, Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes. Now, for those who don't know, Earth's Mightiest Heroes is a cartoon that came out in 2010 and only lasted for 2 seasons. But luckily, the show lives on and it is actually available on Disney+. And I'm going to talk about the show and why I think it's amazing and one of the greatest cartoons ever made. But more importantly, for what I assume you guys would be interested in, is that I'm going to talk about why I think this is one of the great properties to watch for comic book spec, potential stuff to, pull out from this show that might actually see its way into the MCU. And I will get into why I think that is the case later in this video. But before I get into that, if you guys could drop me a like or a comment or subscribe if you're enjoying my content, love interacting with you guys, do one of those things if you want to support the channel, and I would appreciate it if you did it. All right, with that being said, let us get into this video. And luckily, I've been talking about, this idea of, where I get my comic books back. I've kind of hinted at it with you guys. I talk about B tier villains all the time and say I like, Zazax and I like the Serpent Society and things like that. And one of the reasons why I like that is because I've been so affected by this cartoon, Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes. Not just because it's an amazing show that made me a fan of a lot of the characters we saw in it, but it also is an interesting place that I think actually might be one of the areas where the MCU used as a creative brainstorm when they were making the show, because there are a lot of things that when you go back and you watch this show, knowing that it came out in 2010, which was before the very first Avengers, there are a lot of things that in this cartoon you look at it and you're like, oh my god, they did this in the MCU. Now granted, it could just be a coincidence. I mean, MCU stuff is just doing stuff that is based in comic book lore. So, it could just be coincidence that, Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes also was just doing stuff based in comic book lore. But I don't think it's as clear as that, because I'm going to show you, what I think is as evidence to suggest that, there are people who worked on this show who went on to work in the MCU and have had their hands, in these creative discussions. And I have a feeling that, a lot of the stuff that they tried in Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes, they looked at it as a roadmap to help, brainstorm ideas for the MCU. All right. But luckily, as I was preparing for this video, thinking about how am I going to articulate it to you guys, I stumbled across an article of someone who actually felt the same as I did. So they put it in better words than I could put it with you right now, just spitballing. So I want to go with this article, look through it with you guys, talk about some of the key points, then talk about why I think that this show has relevance to the MCU. And then at the end of the video, most importantly, I'm going to talk about, some things that I think might be interesting that we might see later on in the MCU, knowing that, these were things that they did in the cartoon. All right, so let's get into this article, and I have it pulled up here, and that is going to be how the Avengers cartoon influenced the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And this is an article written by Vinnie Murphy. I'll definitely put a link in the description if you guys want to check it out, and it's from a website known as Den of Geek. Don't know too much about their website, but it was a great article, and I'll just read a couple bullet points so that you guys get the overview. So Vinny goes on to say, in 2008, fresh off the success of Iron Man and Incredible Hulk, Marvel Studios was ready to go ahead with their master plan, the Avengers. Lacking the film license to some of their most popular characters, namely Spider-Man and X-Men, Marvel sought to take Earth's Mightiest Heroes into the spotlight. With Iron Man established and Hulk as recognizable as ever, this finally seemed realistic. However, there was one big problem. The public simply didn't know much about the Avengers. Aside from an ill-fated animated series in the 90s, the team had only ever had success on the comics page. Regulars like Captain America and Thor had some cultural significance, but nothing like Batman and Spider-Man. Betting hundreds of millions of dollars on the cinematic success, let alone a team of film, was a gamble. On October 8th, 2008, to help raise awareness for the brand, Marvel officially announced what would become Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes, this cartoon we're talking about, an animated series set for release in October of 2010, a few months prior to the Avengers movie. Projected to release in July of 2011. Earth's Mightiest Heroes would enlist many of the creative forces behind the successful but egregiously short-lived Wolverine and the X-Men, and initially featured Captain America, Iron Man, Thor, Ant-Man, Giant Man, and Wasp, all of whom were integral parts in the development of Marvel Studios. They were all being talked about, though rather blatant with their intentions. Over the next few years, many changes and adjustments would give this cartoon a unique place in Marvel history. Okay, so just to summarize that right there, remember, let's go back, right? Let's go back to 2008, where we're getting our first Iron Man, onto the scene. We have to remember, what was the pop culture? The pop culture, awareness, we didn't know anything about the Avengers. I mean, if you were a comic book fan, you knew who the Avengers were, but let's be honest, even, for people my generation, the Avengers were never that cool. They were cool in the 60s and the 70s, and then the 80s and 90s, you started to have random Avengers, popping up. They weren't the main characters. It's for people our age, Spider-Man was it. Maybe you were into X-Men for sure because of the animated cartoon, but outside of that, nobody really liked Captain America that much. At least I'll speak for myself. I mean, I didn't as a kid, he just wasn't as cool as Spider-Man and X-Men at that time. So here we are in 2008. And Marvel is, starting to do this universe, and they wanted to create a cartoon that was going to help, educate people on, some of these properties. So out came Earth's Mightiest Heroes. All right, let's go on now with the article. Okay, so here we have, after the project's announcement in 2008, a lot changed in Marvel. They were acquired by Disney, yada, yada, yada. And then he goes on to say here, which I agree, but we'll get into this. We probably shouldn't overestimate how much of what Marvel was planning for their upcoming movies made it into Earth's Mightiest Heroes, but the storylines may still give us insight into things to come. Many characters would go on, or already did appear in MCU films, are players in the world of Earth's Mightiest Heroes. Some of this can be attributed to Marvel simply being aware of their most compelling properties, like I mentioned earlier, not to mention which ones were simply available to use, but sometimes it showed a consensus on how characters were portrayed in future projects. So again, this is something that's we don't know that the stuff that came out in the show it was actually because the MCU was oh, this worked, let's use it, or if it's just coincidence because all everything is being pulled from comic books. But there are some really interesting things that emerged in the show, and let me get into some examples now to show you guys. All right, so one of the things that this show did really interestingly is, remember, this is 2010. So in this show, they planted the seeds for the Avengers. They had a team with all the players, and they had Ant-Man and the Wasp. It was the original squad, and they came across the likes of people like the Guardians of the Galaxy. This is 2010. They had Groot, Star-Lord, and Rocket Raccoon as part of their storyline here. They did storylines with Carol Danvers, Miss Marvel, and Captain Marvel. Marvel, they did it, and they did the Kree invasion in this. They did Age of Ultron in this storyline. Additionally, they did the Winter Soldier storyline with Captain America. Again, this is 2010. They're doing Winter Soldier, and they're doing the whole storyline with Bucky Barnes and everything like that. And this is way before, the release of, the 2014 Captain America, when they actually had Winter Soldier in it. They did, the Kree Skrull War. They did the Skrull invasion. They have all of these things that would later come into it. They did Ant-Man storylines. They did Carol Danvers. Yada yada yada. They had all these things, and I'm gonna say to you right now, if you guys decide to watch this show, I'm telling you, you're gonna watch this and you're gonna be like, wow, they were doing these properties before we ever saw them in the MCU, and that's crazy. And not to mention that, they were actually hitting a lot of the emotional beats of the MCU. I mean, they would do storylines that were, hitting just like the MCU. When you watch the MCU, it was really amazing. They had these characters down. The spirit of the characters were totally in this show, and it was really impressive. All right, so they do this show, but let's talk about some of the people who created the show, because this is what I also think is really interesting. So the head writer, so again, Earth's Mightiest Heroes, the head writer of this show was a guy named Christopher Yost. And for those who don't know, Christopher Yost actually went on to write Thor Ragnarok and Thor the Dark World. So this is really interesting to me, because it's here you have a guy who's in 2010, he's writing Earth's Mightiest Heroes, very, very successful show. And he does such a great job that they bring him over to write Thor the Dark World. Granted, we all think Thor: The Dark World kind of sucks, but hey, not everything's going to be a home run. But he did go on to, again, write Thor Ragnarok, and we all know how successful that was. And now he's actually one of the writers on The Mandalorian. So, this is some of the creative, energy and juice that they were plucking out of this cartoon show that Feige was taking. He was like, hey, I like what you guys are doing. Let me take some of that, let me take some of that energy. Additionally, let's take a look at some of the other players here. For those who don't know, Marvel has a creative committee, where they do discussions about, the properties. It's not just Kevin Feige who's like, oh, this is, I'm going to read comic books and come up with all storylines. He's got a team of people who work on this stuff. And some of those names are that worked on that stuff is Dan Buckley and Alan Fine. Now, these are two people that are recognized as credited being on the Marvel Creative Committee and were also producers of this cartoon show, Earth's Mightiest Heroes. And you can see from their credits here, they went on to work on Captain America: Winter Soldier and Captain America here and Jessica Jones. Alan Fine also went on to do Ant-Man, Guardians of the Galaxy, Avengers, and Age of Ultron. They still have projects in the works here. And additionally, Jeff Loeb was a producer who went on to do Daredevil, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., Jessica Jones, and he's also working on the MODOK show, the animated one, and has a current a current Disney Plus show in the works that is unannounced. So, these are some of the people that were working on Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes, this cartoon, that were just, working in the Marvel Creative Committee, working on this cartoon. And now you can see that they're working on MCU related projects now. So it is, I feel like it's safe to presume that, some of these people who are having these creative discussions and successfully, realize them in the cartoon, we might see some of these creative ideas translate to the MCU. Granted, not every idea that is in Earth's Mightiest Heroes is going to make its way to the MCU, but we know that if it is something that they at least tried and played with, then there's reason to suspect that it might make its way to the MCU, which is where all the speculation comes from. All right, so with that all being said, if hopefully I've convinced you that this is an interesting landscape to look at as far as like speculation is concerned, let me talk to you guys about some of the stuff that was dealt with in Earth's Mightiest Heroes, but hasn't made its way to the MCU yet, and some stuff that sort of excites me for speculation reasons, because who knows, we might see them in the next couple phases. All right. Let's go on here now. So one of the first things that was kind of cool about Earth's Mightiest Heroes is they did a storyline with a character known as Michael Korvac. And Michael Korvac is a scientist who was plucked out by like the Badoon species, except they did in this version, they did a Kree storyline, but he is like super, super powerful. Like he becomes this crazy, crazy villain. He goes up against the Guardians of the Galaxy, specifically in this episode. And one of the really interesting things here is like, this is another thing to point out. The Guardians of the Galaxy team that made their way into this cartoon was actually Star-Lord, Groot, Rocket Raccoon, Adam Warlock, and Quasar, but Quasar was the female version of Quasar. So that's something that's really interesting for us to think about as we get into spec. I can see it possible that, in Guardians of the Galaxy 3, if they're pulling some of these ideas, we might see a Michael Korvac, tied to a Guardians team, or we might see him tied to, what's going on with the Kree race and things like that, because he's an important villain, and there are a lot of touch points that they could bring a character like him into the MCU. And if we want to take a look at his book, this is a book that I know has been talked about before in other speculation videos. This is Giant Size Defenders number 3, and this is the first appearance of Michael Korvac. So, definitely something interesting to keep your eye on. Prices up and down with this book, definitely different things that you can see. But this is one that, if I ever came across it, I would definitely grab it, because I think that there is potential with this character. All right, one of the other storylines that they did, and again, I've talked about this many, many times, and this is why I, always talk about Tales to Astonish 63, is they did do a big storyline with the leader in Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes, and they had him tied to MODOK right here. They had him tied to Baron Strucker with AIM. They had him tied to Abomination, and they had Leader doing a lot of work. And I think that this is really cool because, if we get a Leader back into the MCU, he has a lot of relationships with these other characters like Abomination and like MODOK and AIM, and there's just a lot of ways that they can utilize him. And so when they announced that Abomination was coming back in She-Hulk, that to me was light bulbs just going off that it's like, it seems like they're gonna do something with Leader, because like Abomination and Leader, they're joined at the hip, when it comes to like a lot of their storylines and how they fight the Hulk and everything like that. So that was really interesting, and especially since I saw it in Earth's Mightiest Heroes, I got to think that maybe we're going to see it in the MCU. All right, and just for the sake of record, I know that I've talked about this on the channel, but maybe if you're new to this channel or new to my channel, first appearance of Leader is Tales to Astonish 63. This is one of those first full appearances versus first cameo appearance situations. But, this is the book that, I personally own as a spec. And so I think that that's pretty cool. Additionally, one of the other things that's cool about the Leader, I'll just quickly mention, is he recruits a team to do his fighting and bidding within context to this show. And that team is a team known as the Wrecking Crew. And so I kind of wanted to bring it up to you guys because I think this is pretty cool. I love the B tier villains, but the Wrecking Crew's first appearance is in Defenders 18. So, definitely something that, maybe you guys want to just, Google them and do some research. They have their individual first appearances, but this is a team that was used in the cartoon, and I think it's pretty interesting. All right, next up here we have the Serpent Society. And I've been talking about the Serpent Society a lot, on this channel. And one of the reasons that I'm so excited about them is because they were used in this show. Now, there is too many members of the Serpent Society to actually talk about in this video. So I'm only going to point out one of them, and that one is going to be Viper, which is, she right here used to be called Madam Hydra, but she is now Lady Viper as she relates to the Serpent Society. And her first appearance is Captain America 110. She is known as Madam Hydra in this rendition of the story. And then in Captain America 180, she becomes a character known as Viper. And Viper is really cool. She takes, lead of the Serpent Society at some point. And, she's just a great character, I think, to spec on. I gotta think that, even if we don't get the Serpent Society, which I think we will, because we're seeing all these hints of like the Roxxon Corporation. Serpent Society, for those who don't know, is like they're like a private for hire villain team, and a lot of evil corporations use them to do their bidding. And I just see them as being players in the MCU. Like anytime the MCU just needs like bad guys to fight in those Disney Plus shows, like just pluck one out of, from the Serpent Society, have them involved. I think we're going to see a lot of them, especially, Lady Viper. All right, let's move on now to some of the other picks here that is interesting to the show. And this one's going to be really exciting. This one is Annihilus. Yeah, they did an Annihilus storyline in Earth's Mightiest Heroes. And I think that there's, reason to believe that we might get Annihilus in the MCU. And this was really cool because they had like actually a lot of the heroes in the Serpent Society and even the Leader and all of them, they all got transported into the negative zone and they all had to team up against Annihilus. So can you imagine like a Marvel, event film where Annihilus is the bad guy, but like a lot of the bad guys actually have to join the Avengers? Like that would be pretty cool. That'd be different, right? We haven't seen the heroes and the villains have to come together to fight a Thanos level threat. So Annihilus is one of those storylines that I think is interesting that they could do, that would be exciting for them because they could utilize villains in it as well. And for those who don't know, Annihilus's first appearance is Fantastic Four Annual 6. And this is a book that's definitely been heating up. It's also the first appearance of Franklin Richards, by the way, which is kind of like, you're getting a twofer for this. So this is a really, really interesting book. Definitely like not necessarily that cheap. I mean, I've seen some raws go for like the $100 range, but if you can find a good deal on this book, I definitely think it's worth picking up, especially since we're getting the Fantastic Four and he plays such a role in their storyline. I would definitely keep my eye out for it. All right, let's move on now to some of the other stuff that I think is interesting in this show, and that is going to be the Masters of Evil. Yes, in Earth's Mightiest Heroes, they did a whole Masters of Evil plot, and I've talked about this on the channel before, but I do think that we're gonna get the Masters of Evil in the MCU eventually. I think we're gonna go to the Thunderbolts first, but I think the Thunderbolts are going to morph into the Masters of Evil, and you can see here from the roster they had Baron Zemo, Abomination, Crimson Dynamo, they had Enchantress, Whirlwind, Living Laser, they have here Wonder Man, which I think is really interesting, except he's not quite Wonder Man yet. He is like the evil Wonder Man at first. So that's kind of really cool too. If we're gonna get Grim Reaper in WandaVision, which a lot of people are talking about Grim Reaper in WandaVision, Grim Reaper's brother is Wonder Man. Again, I look at this stuff. If it was in Earth's Mightiest Heroes, to me, it's worth maybe thinking about it as spec. So, you never really know with Wonder Man Avengers number 9. But the two books I want to point out here are going to be Avengers number 6, First Appearance of the Masters of Evil. You've seen this book on the wall behind me, and another one here, Journey into Mystery 103. I thought that maybe we would see Enchantress come, maybe in the Loki show, maybe in Thor Love and Thunder. Right now it doesn't seem like there's any rumors to suggest that, but I still feel like Enchantress is such an important character in Marvel that they would want to put her in the MCU in some way. Because I do think that having a Masters of Evil team would be really, really awesome. So again, this is all speculation, but Earth's Mightiest Heroes did it really, really well. We have a lot of creatives that came from that space. They're now working on MCU stuff. You never know. You never know. All right. And then next up here, just to point out, because I feel like this is an honorable mention for me, because we already know that Kang is coming, but Earth's Mightiest Heroes, one of the big villains that they built up to in the season finale was Kang. So imagine watching this show in 2010, you would have known that Kang would have been a potential villain on the table. And now that we know, we're seeing him. And again, they also had Black Knight as a part of that. They had Chronopolis. So this is an honorable mention for me. And, again, Avengers number 8, in case you didn't know, first appearance of Kang the Conqueror. And then the last thing that they built up to, which was this was their final episode of the of the show. They only lasted 2 seasons, but the final build up that they led to is Galactus. And so for me, Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes, I gotta think maybe MCU is going to do Galactus. I mean, we all know that Galactus is going to come, but to me, this solidifies it that they were like, okay, we're going to build like an Avengers level team to fight him. I mean, look at this roster in the cartoon that they put together: Fantastic Four, Doc Samson, Falcon, Spider-Man, Wolverine, everybody, Captain Marvel, Vision, Hulk. They put together like everybody to fight Galactus in this show, and then Galactus had all his heralds there, so those are interesting ones to spec on. But if you want to get the Galactus book, you're going to have to put out a lot of money to get your hands on Fantastic Four 49. All right, so that is all I have for this video here. Again, I'm a big fan of this show, Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes. Regardless of comic book spec, you guys should definitely watch this show. If you guys like, the animated X-Men show, the animated X-Men cartoon from the 90s, you're gonna love Earth's Mightiest Heroes. This is honestly one of the best cartoons I've ever watched. Definitely one of the best superhero cartoons I've ever seen. And additionally, we know that we had a lot of creative people come from this show. This was made by Marvel Studios, before it blew up into the thing it was. This was like, something that they created. So we know that a lot of the creative conversations around this cartoon might have found their way into the MCU. And that's something that really excites me for spec. So, definitely, load up Disney Plus, start watching the show. You're going to enjoy it. I promise you that. And then, you might get little light bulbs as you watch the show. You might see characters that are like, huh, that's really interesting. Okay, I never thought about that guy. Oh, that could lead to that. You might end up getting a really, really good spec idea out of it. Anyways, that's all I got for this video. Hopefully it wasn't too long and rambling, and hopefully you guys got something out of it. Let me know in the comments, have you guys seen this show before? Do you think, I'm crazy over here thinking that the cartoon's going to lead to MCU spec? Let me know. Do you think that, there's any spec that came out of the show that you guys have seen, or if you've had similar ideas? Anyways, drop me a like, comment, or subscribe if you're enjoying the content, and I will see you in the next video.